Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jean, the Digital Event Manager at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. We are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest challenges by creating use of technology. Today I'm very excited to welcome you to join the Events for Purpose in 2022 with Adam McCurdy and Shani Lane. Adam McCurdy is the co-founder and CEO of Humanitex, the world's first humane ticketing platform that donates all profits from booking fees to children's charities. Backed by Google.org and Alexian Foundation, Humanitex turns every event into an opportunity to help disadvantaged kids get access to education, healthcare, and a fair go in life. Adam is also a Churchill Fellow, Third Sector 2018 Social Entrepreneur of the Year, and SW Premier Medal for Business Excellence in Social Impact, and also a Westpac Top 20 Business of Tomorrow. Also, as you can see, we have Shani today. So she's the partner and managing director at Usual Suspects Creative. She's also the left brain, right brain entrepreneurial powerhouse who has a balanced sense of creativity, business, and people. As a co-founder at Usual Suspects Creative, she drives the company's creative and business vision to deliver meaningful life experiences. She's also the Australian partner of Good, the new cool, a purpose-driven company that celebrates people who use business and culture as a force of good. In 2021, she was named BNT's Best of the Best Social Change Maker. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted. If you have any technical issues, please type into the questions box, and I'll be here to assist you. If you have any questions during the sections, please also type it into the box, and they will get them answered by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. There's no silly questions, but please also note that your comments and questions will not be appear to the entire group. And now the webinar is being recorded. This recording will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days. Finally, there's a little short survey at the end of the webinar. Please help us to complete the survey for even better experience in the future. All right, now I'll pass on to Adam and Shani for today's section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's really nice to be here. Myself and Shani are really excited to have quite an in-depth conversation about what we've experienced, really mainly focusing on what we've gone through in the last 2 years when it comes to events and how it affects the nonprofit sector, and where to from now with the return to live events or something in the middle or a whole other shift in the industry. As Jean mentioned, both myself and Shani bring quite a bit of experience as well as scars from the last couple of years, as maybe many of you on the call. I run Humanitex, which partners up with hundreds of non-profit event organizers as the ticketing platform for their events. We give all the profits of the fees back to the charity or non-profit themselves. And Shani is running Usual Suspects, is teaming up with many, many non-profits, both big and small, to help them execute both the marketing and the content and the promotion and logistics of events, fundraising events and the like. So we've seen quite a fair bit of what's been happening in the nonprofit sector and for-purpose events, and how marketers have been adjusting, bobbing, weaving, ducking, and now looking forward into the future when it comes to live events and hybrid and digital events. So Shani, thanks for joining us, and welcome today.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here. And man, I'm actually exhausted just thinking about the last 2 years as you've described it. So yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to be back in the world of events. And thanks for having me today.
Pleasure. My pleasure. I guess let's first kind of start by setting a little bit of context before we look into the future. So I'm really keen to see, from your perspective, what what kind of is the story from your view of the last 2 years? You know, having looked at with what event organizers, how they've been adapting to COVID and how people have been adapting to how they expect to interact with a for-purpose event or a fundraising event. What does that story look like for you in the last 2 years?
It's a story with quite an arc, isn't it? I mean, it is a bit of a roller coaster. Before I get into it though, Adam, hey, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking to you all today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and anyone who might be on the call who is Indigenous.
Thank you.
The last 2 years, I don't think anyone expected, no one really could expect what we had. And there were few industries who were affected as much as the events industry. I guess a blanket banning of mass gatherings pretty much meant the end to most of what you and I do, because everything that we do is a non-essential mass gathering. I guess essential to who was the question I asked many times. It was difficult, wasn't it? I remember we went out to lunch on the 19th of March, took the afternoon off and just thought, what's happening to the world? And as it crashed down, that was the last time we spent in the office for 6 months. And for the next 3 to 4 weeks, we dealt with calls from clients who were postponing. That was the initial feeling, like, okay, let's just see how this passes, and we'll push everything that we had for March, April, May back to maybe June, July, August, and we'll push it back to winter. And as we know, it didn't finish quickly, and those postponements ended up being cancellations. So I think for most of the event industry, there was strife. It felt like this could be the end of a lot of businesses, and we do know that quite a lot of businesses had to shut their doors because they were really exposed. And thankfully, the government did come through with some support there, so I think that was great. But then it came back on at the end of 2020. I know that we had a big event in November of 2020, and it felt great, although people were very cautious about events. And we had lots of not-for-profit clients who were also cautious about getting people in a room and then being responsible for what might be a super spreader, because they were the words that people used a lot in the event industry. And we had a great event. We had an amazing event for AANA, who's an advertising industry peak body. And then we had another amazing event for UN Women, where lots of people were in the room. And then it was just a few months later where everything shut down again. So it really was this like amazing surge of hopefulness, and we're back on track to again crashing down. And I think the adjustments that we have to make as event organizers, but also organizations who are trying to fundraise, help people, create impact, all of those things. And when all of the control is really taken away from you, it's difficult. So yes, it was a roller coaster, and COVID hasn't been kind. What I will say is, we're feeling like we're out of that. Although I saw in the New York Times yesterday that Australia's the #1 hotspot for Omicron now, and we're kind of moving on with business. I think we looked back at other countries like, the Netherlands and Sweden, a year or so ago, and like, hey, they're living like COVID's not a thing, and we're kind of there again now. And I guess we need to see what happens in the next few months in terms of what what is it, BA and BA4 and BA5 do, and how that affects us again.
And I'm curious to know, when event hosts were adjusting to the unpredictable conditions of running their events, and often looking at moving things online, and then dabbling with the idea of hybrid solutions, what was your view on how that was received by guests and their expectations, and I guess the expectations of the event host, and the perception of an adequate service, or they're doing their best, or what, this is better, or some other kind of interpretation of kind of what was going on as things shifted more digital out of necessity?
Look, I think it was an intense time of learning for everybody, you know, how to do events when you can't meet face to face. For us personally, our feeling was just keep busy. Let's just keep doing things. What can we do in this lockdown that makes us feel like we're still actually making a difference? And our business actually set up what was the first ever two-way concert series during 2020 COVID. So it was called Inside Sets. My husband works in the music industry, and you know, all of our friends in events had kind of lost their jobs or lost their income, and then all of his friends in the music industry had lost all of their gigs, and we were kind of thinking, okay, what can we do here? So we started Inside Sets, and we had some really amazing performers, Briggs and Nairi and Nookie, Kobe D, and a bunch of others. Horror show.
It was awesome.
Yeah, and so we did a series of comedy and music sets. So Rove McManus and Tahir and a bunch of people. So we put everyone into the factory, which in Marrickville here in Sydney, which had no one coming, and we gave money to the venue, we gave money to the tech crews. We actually got it sponsored by Twitch and the City of Sydney at that stage, and we got 100 grand in to give back at that stage to people who needed it. Granted, we didn't pay ourselves anything, but hey, we kept busy, and that for us was a time of learning because we understood what it took then to create a hybrid event. We had 20 people in the audience, which was the maximum capacity you could have in an audience at that stage. And then we had, you know, thousands of people on the line. So I think there was a lot of trying and testing, and, you know, we learned pretty quickly. There was a bit of a fail on one of the comedy events where, you know, there's a lag in the virtual world. That never would have gone down very well with a client, but because everyone knew that we were just trying it and it was the first time that it would happen, you know, I think people forgave us for a few of the technical glitches in that first one. So I think that was, you know, I guess people were more flexible about the way events were delivered, and people were up for trying things. So, you know, we had people holding up signs from their lounge room saying, you know, I'm a gardener, you know, the comedians say, what are you? You know, who are you? What do you do? And so they'd hold up signs. So that was quite cool. And we learn a lot from that, and, you know, it just made us so much better.
That had to be the toughest format to pull off in an online setting with a comedian as the, you know, as the entertainment. I remember hearing from quite a few nonprofits. Yeah, exactly. I remember hearing from quite a few nonprofits that already kind of had scheduled a high-profile comedian for their big event that was supposed to be live to transition to online, and it was very, very difficult to try to pull that off because a comedian, it's near impossible to be a comedian in the first place, but B, when you don't have that feedback from the audience, that was a really difficult one to try to mimic online.
Oh, totally. We totally agree. We got around that by having that minimum audience in there. So even just 20 people in a room gave them some energy to feed back off. And it was the same with the musicians, actually. You know, there were people kind of bobbing along, and then they'd point out to people in the audience and say, hey, I see you, or, you know, hey, Chris, I see you up there. And people would like wave back to them, and people at home all of a sudden realized, hey, okay, I'm actually in the room. So I think, you know, it was really hard. It was really hard setting that up and making it technically work. But, you know, we are better for it. And since then, you know, hybrid's the way to go. I don't think hybrid is going anywhere. What we learned, you know, we did quite a lot of research in terms of who's going to come to this thing before we throw 100 grand at it and, you know, kind of sink or swim type of moment. And we realized that such a large percentage of the population are in regional or rural Australia, and who would never have the opportunity to go and see horror show at the Factory Theatre can now do it, you know, for $20, and they can feel like they're in the room and they can have that interaction with the artist. So, you know, that was actually really special. And not only that, it's also access from a disability perspective, because 1 in 5 Australian families have a family member in their household who has some kind of disability, which makes access to shows, concerts, etc. hard as well. So we realized that we were really opening the gates there. And, you know, we've seen that now in the last 2 years with other clients. You know, some of our online virtual audiences are huge, and some of them match what's happening in the room, or exceed what's happening in the room. So, you know, it's here to stay. And I think if you do it well, then it can be really effective.
What are some of the things you see that most define whether or not it's done well or not? And do you see any risks of potentially the online component cannibalizing some of the audience that would have been there that in live, if it had just been live, and there might have been a more valuable guest or candidate to attend the event in a live setting compared to online? Or any cautions to throw out there? And yeah, what makes it for a good hybrid setup?
Okay, so it's a double barrel question. Let's go for what makes it good first, and then we'll talk about cannibalization. I think if you can make it as interactive as possible, then you're going to have a great show. And, you know, Inside Sets did that because there was a two-way kind of conversation. And then we've done it really well, I'd say, with UN Women Australia, who are another great client of ours. And we do International Women's Day for them. So it's 5 cities across the country and over 5,000 guests across those cities. So they're jam-packed conference centres or convention centres, plus the online element. Last year, we had over 5,000 people in the rooms, but we also had over 5,000 people tuning into the virtual hub. That has never been done before. They would never have sold over 10,000 tickets for this. But because it was so accessible, first of all, from a price perspective, you know, you don't have to pay the $200 to go to the fancy lunch, but you can still get the content for, you know, a fraction of that cost, and from wherever you are. So I don't need to travel to the city if I'm an hour or more away, or I can do it with my kids at home. You know, all of those things that kind of stop you from going to events, we take away the barriers. So making it easy, yes, but also within that space, we had a hub, which meant that anyone could tap into any of the live events across the city, across the country. So if I was in Sydney, I could watch the Sydney stage, but then I could bump over and see what's happening in Perth, or go down and see what was happening in Melbourne. And it put me in control of what my event experience was. So it just is a more fluid, more accessible, but also a more ownable experience. Plus, we can add other content in. So not only did we have live content, we also had pre-recorded content. We had a virtual host, and we're doing this pretty successfully with most of our events now, where the virtual audience doesn't just come in and see what the live event audience is seeing. They're also getting a personal host. In the last event, we had Matt O'Kine, who is a comedian. He used to be the host of Triple J Breakfast, and he now has a podcast. Super funny guy and super smart, and he says hey to everyone down the barrel of the camera. He's like, great to have you here today. Everyone's coming in the room here at Randwick, but we've got some jokes, and we're going to talk to you about what's happening at home. And some of you at home have already received a special kit that we sent out to 200 of you. Now's a great time to get out the cookies that we might have sent for morning tea, or there's a tea for Mood Tea. So, you know, we get our sponsors to contribute to that virtual experience as well. And just by having content that is specifically there for a virtual audience, they feel automatically more connected. And it's not just an event that they're kind of a secondary audience for, but they've got their own event. So that has worked well, I think. And then, as I said, you know, we send some goodie bags to some people as well, which actually is fun. So that kind of probably ties up, you know, some of the great ways to do virtual events and still make them engaging. And then on the cannibalization side, you're right. It's a tricky territory. And what we've seen in a lot of corporate events in particular is where people might have traveled from Melbourne or Brisbane to come to Sydney, or vice versa in the past. They're now more likely to buy a virtual ticket. But what we've also seen is they buy a virtual ticket not just for them, but for their team. So I think generally the amount of money or the revenue that the client or the organization gets is probably about the same, because they say, okay, I used to spend $1,000 for the ticket plus the flights. Now I can spend $1,000 and maybe get 10 or 20 team members along, and they can all benefit from the content. So it seems to be evening out, and that's just me, finger in the air. There's no stats to back that up, but it does feel as though the rooms are just as full as they used to be, and the virtual rooms are growing.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember seeing that with UN Women. It was such a phenomenal turnout. That was unreal. I wanted to ask an interesting question that's been on the mind of many people is we come into late 2022 and 2023 with hopefully COVID abating and being somewhat a thing of the past, although it seems like we're not completely out the woods yet, is the topic of fatigue, where perhaps there was a situation where people found themselves at home. This whole new thing of jumping on online events was new and, well, the only option. So I'm happy to do it. And then over time, the combination of working from home, attending everything online, and more and more of my life being in my laptop, created a bit of fatigue in attending these events. And where you see that playing a role, and your thoughts on how you think it's going to unfold in the future, as there might be some drop off of people who previously were attending online events because it was unique and they were rightfully afraid of catching COVID, and then when they don't need to, they don't want to. And your thoughts on the potential split of population in each bucket, or whether that's just the wrong way to be looking at it.
Look, webinar fatigue is definitely a thing, and it was absolutely a thing at the end of 2020 because everyone was forced to do everything on screen and there was no option. I think now that there's a little bit more choice, that has changed because people who can go to live events and get the networking and the live event energy will do that, and then the people who actually need to pick up the kids or whatever the other things they're backing onto that meeting and the priorities are, they can actually get all of those things done as well. So fatigue is still a thing. Everything that you do online needs to be obviously adding value, because if you're talking about something that people aren't interested in or I guess can't get anything from, then they're not going to listen for long enough. I think time is really difficult. I mean, doing virtual events for a day we found is quite hard, and people will tap in and out and maybe have something playing in the background while they're actually doing, their real work. So there's more kind of multi-screen viewing of webinars, and maybe again, we're talking about no one can actually multitask. I think there is a little bit more of I'll listen to it in the background and see if anything piques my interest as I kind of get this document done or whatever it might be. So probably webinars mean a little bit less attention. You don't get everyone's attention as you might in the room.
And what do you think over the next 12 months are, the opportunities, the biggest opportunities that lie before non-profit marketers and event organizers that they should be considering more seriously and looking to take advantage of it if it's the right fit for their organization?
Yeah, I think that there is the world has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and I think without being super political, it's pretty clear that there are there's a definite line in terms of how people feel. What I would say for nonprofits is there is a bigger groundswell than ever, I think, from people who want to do good. There is a bigger groundswell, especially for millennials. I think the census results were released this morning, and for the first time ever, millennials and boomers are matched in quantity.
Oh, wow.
And, it's 2022. That's the first we've ever seen it in our generation ever, So I think the way that the country operates in the next couple of years will really swing, because millennials care about things that they've been taught to care about, the environment and poverty and social justice on all levels. And I think they are our biggest advocates. You know, you can only do so much talking about what you do, what you believe in, what impact you create. The best way to actually tell your story is to get an advocate to tell it for you. And, you know, we see that on social media where things go viral pretty quickly. None of that's planned. I mean, some of it's tried for, and then the craziest things kind of take off. So I think, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, Roe versus Wade at the moment, it's obviously lots of controversy, but if you can get the right people in your corner, and I think, you know, the future generations are the right people for us because they really care, then there's lots of opportunity there for marketing and promotion of social justice, if I can put it that way.
And what do you think are the most powerful levers to, as a marketer or an event producer, to be reaching the millennial generation? You know, types of content, the way you produce the event, that really resonates most with that generation from what you've seen?
It's got to be impact for me, you know, like actually showing that what you're doing is changing something. You know, when we started our business, my business partner, Charisse, and I had worked in events, marketing and advertising for about 20 years now. And when we started our business, we were like, okay, so, you know, for the telcos and the publishers and all that kind of stuff, like how much more stuff can we sell? You know, we're probably getting to the point where it feels like we could do something different. So when we started our business, we were like, okay, we want to create events with meaning. We want to, you know, create moments that matter. And that's that was the brickwork. That was the foundation for our business. And we didn't really know how we were going to do that yet, because actually our first client was Channel 7. And, you know, at that stage, didn't have the best reputation of being a purpose-driven business. And, you know, so there's a bit of conflict, but we definitely set our goals there to say, okay, cool, do good stuff, pretty much, like make all moments matter. And then over the past almost 7 years, we've gotten to a point where over almost 80% of our revenue comes from not-profits and charities, which feels like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Because most of the time, you know, when you work with charities and not-profit, that there's not huge amounts of budgets that they have for marketing and promotion. But what we found works really well is just showing how much you can change things. And, you know, with one of our clients, they're like, oh, you know, we can't spend the extra X thousand of dollars to do this. And we're like, just try it this year and let's see what happens to your fundraising. And they literally almost doubled their fundraising for the year from this single event. And it was just because they tried something different. And, you know, it was the hybrid. It was fundraising in different ways, not the traditional call outs. And they've kind of seen that people do react to things maybe, you know, differently than they've done things. So there is lots of opportunity to do things differently. And, you know, for us as a business, it's amazing. I used to always say, you know, in stressful times when, you know, the producers or the account teams are kind of melting down, just thinking like it's all too much. We used to say, hey guys, it's cool, you know, we're not saving lives, we're just doing events. And I'm like, guys, we're saving lives. We're actually saving lives. You know, our business in the last 12 months has worked on events that have raised over $1 million for charities.
Wow.
Which I can't believe. I mean, I think it's just amazing that has happened.
Wow.
But, you know, $1 million out of, you know, the work that we do. And now we can feel like we really love what we do even more because we're actually creating great things. So, you know, we are actually saving lives, not directly, but indirectly. I mean, you know, we talked about one of the events that we've done with Humanitics. There was an extra $27,000 worth of, you know, booking fees, you know, the profits from the booking fees that actually went to a great cause. So even just, you know, making little tweaks to your business using other like-minded businesses who all want to do good things, you know, it all adds up. So I think it's trying new things, taking calculated risks, and you know, finding like-minded people who can be, safe advisors for you.
Well, it definitely sounds like a more and more emerging opportunity for nonprofits to be tapping into, whether it be professional service providers or corporate service providers or other service providers who have a large millennial workforce who are keen and hungry to be and would prefer to be working with nonprofit clients, like you mentioned, where you can translate your professional service into a good for a frontline nonprofit or charity or for-purpose organization that is, like in your case, in your example, saving lives. So you can really tie the two together and get that motivation.
Yeah, and we've seen that often, not only with like our clients, but also with other people we work with. There's a point where a millennial needs to make a choice on what job they're going to take, and more often than not, they base it on their values. What is this business doing, and how do they align with the way that I think and feel and operate in the world? Are we aligned? And that's the way we're going to go. And of course, you're not always going to tick all of the boxes, but obviously by being true to yourself and true to your values, then it's much harder to go wrong.
And I also wanted to ask, you talked a lot about how in the with online events and their production, how things have changed in the last 2 years, and how it seems like it will in large part remain a thing and quite a strategic thing for many events to consider in their mix. Is there anything you're seeing different now in the way events, and particularly nonprofit events, are running their live events now in 2022 and looking forward in 2023? Or is it coming back to much the same of what it was and going back to the learnings and the bread and butter of what makes for a good live event? Or are there differences?
I haven't seen a vast amount of change, to be honest, in the live event space. I mean, what I will say is people are trying to be smarter about how they spend their budgets, because there is an expectation, that return on investment needs to be high. It needs to be, we need to make solid choices. So people are probably a little bit more cautious about trying new things, which I said, that's where you need to kind of sometimes take a little bit of a risk to see how things go, because in a world of instability, it just feels better to be safe a lot of the time. But look, I think most events that we've done are pretty much the same, except that there's a hybrid element for most.
Yeah, that's so interesting to see. I mean, I've experienced it a few times where either going to a conference or going to a gala dinner recently in the last few months, and for many people, it's their first big live event they've been to since the pandemic happened. And I noticed this kind of, oh my God, I'm back. We're real people. We're seeing people, and I've noticed quite a few savvier event hosts kind of leaning into that, restart. Not shying away from the fact that we haven't done this for a while. And hey, everyone, it's nice to see you. We're a bit rusty. Haven't done this for a while either. But it's kind of
I've seen that in
way
lots
to kind
of
of kickstart the engine again.
Yeah, it's true. It's really true. We even in both years, 2020 and 2021, we did events in November of both of those years respectively. And the first one in 2020 went off well. There were probably half the amount of people in the room, and everyone was spread out. Although even within that spacing, with a 1-to-2 ratio, one person every 2 square meters, which was a vast amount of space for not a lot of people, and there were some people that felt uncomfortable in the room. And then, but it went off without a hitch. It was great. And then the next year, where all of the restrictions were taken away, we then had an amazing event where everyone was back in. Everyone was the life of the party, and we had COVID cases off the back of it. And not just one or two, it was multiple COVID cases. I think, 6 months earlier, it would have been labeled a super spreader event. But, that label kind of disappeared from mainstream media, which was great for us because we didn't get the label. But I think people now recognize there's a risk in going to the grocery store, in taking your kids to sport, or in going to a corporate event. And it's a calculated risk. So for me, look, I'm going overseas next week. I need to get on an airplane. I need to be rat tested on the other end. So, you know, I'm probably not going to go anywhere this week. I'm going to keep a low profile. If I did have a big event on, I'd probably prefer to do it virtually. But for somebody else who doesn't have health risks or travel restrictions that might influence their decision, then they're probably going to be a little bit more optimistic or risk adverse, less risk adverse, because there's not, I guess the consequences aren't as big as they might be for others. So I think that choice is still going to be something that happens for the next couple of years, you know, depending on how the world reacts to the next wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just because of what you have to do in the isolation requirements of if you were to catch COVID and how that ruins your future plans.
I mean, we had an event in March, and March 28, we'd worked on this event for 18 months. It had been pushed back twice. We had 3 different dates for this event. And on the 26th of March, I tested positive for COVID. So it was like, you know, you do all the work, 18 months worth of like a hard slog, and then can't actually go to the event. And that's the first event I've ever kind of watched along, and it all happened okay. You know, we've got an amazing team that made it all work, but you just don't know what's ahead of you. So, you know, I guess you take the risk when you can.
It was fascinating to watch that. I mean, I got married just this last March, on the 27th of March. And
congrats.
Thank you. And it was, yeah, very much we saw that dynamic play out, but, you know, obviously much more heightened because it's your own wedding and there's family attending. And what we noticed was people weren't actually that, oddly enough, afraid of catching COVID. It was more because of the health concerns. It was more, I really want to go to the wedding or attend my own wedding. And so then there was kind of a picking and choosing of a priority of a live gathering that you want to attend. And so, okay, I really want to go to the wedding. Therefore, in the 2 weeks leading up to that wedding, because that's my top priority of the event that I want to go to, I'm not going to go to any other events in the lead up to that. Obviously in a wedding, that's kind of more of an exaggerated example, but we definitely see that play out in the live event space where people are kind of picking and choosing and not wanting to write themselves off for a future event or a future bit of travel that they're doing, like in your story and in your case.
Absolutely. And we've seen that with client events too. You know, we've had people say, you've got 2 things coming up. They're both within the same week. I really want to go to this one that's afterwards, and I can't risk getting sick, you know, in the couple of days leading up to it, so I won't come. So, you know, because there is an influx of events at the moment and lots on the calendar, it is one of the things that you need to consider when selling tickets.
I mean, on the health concerns side of things with the virus, that's still going around and still prevalent. It was very apparent last year where there was starting to become a bit of a generational divide between older generations that were more fearful of going to gatherings and younger people that were a bit more confident in going to live events and, you know, whatever happens. And we've seen it across the spread of our events where, you know, music festivals for young people roared back very, very quickly with very keen punters wanting to go back to the dance floor, whilst, you know, folk festivals who attract a bit of an older crowd have been much, much slower to spin back up because of a more hesitant patron base that are more fearful of the virus. Is that something that you've seen play out in your world, and how that's played into this kind of hybrid model, and therefore kind of how the offerings might cater to different generations? Or if that's kind of just fizzling away and no longer such a generational divide as we were seeing last year?
I think with the pullback of COVID chat in media, I think Australia has seemed to put it as more of a back burner, you know, issue, and we don't see a huge difference in you know, a generational divide in terms of attendance. You know, we do a lot of events that are in the corporate world that kind of, you know, like 30 to 60-year-old people might come, but we've also done an event for Sydney Zoo, the new Sydney Zoo out out west. They did a light festival that was called Glow, and lots of money for animal conservation, etc. And it was absolutely packed. In fact, it sold out. You know, they sold out the entire 3 weeks, and then they extended for another 2 weeks to make sure as many people go as possible. And they were families with, you know, babies in prams and grandmas, you know, holding candy, what is it, fairy floss at the zoo at night. So, you know, I do think that there are people who are a lot more optimistic about going to events at all ages. It's really about not if you're going to catch COVID, but can you catch it at a convenient time, like you said. You know, try to avoid anything before, I guess, some more things that are higher up the priority list.
That's super interesting. Jean, I'm conscious as well, we're coming up to 15 minutes to go when we thought might be a good time to start taking questions. I don't know whether any questions have already started coming through on the chat. If you do have a question, I think, apologies, I should have flagged to you when I started talking that the chat is open for questions. So if you've got a question that's burning or that you're curious about, feel free to jump in the chat and share that with Jean. Can pass it over to me. In the meantime, have there been any questions that have come through, Jean?
Yeah, sure. We got the questions from Farina. So I just assigned the questions to you. The question is about, do you see social media as a key tool for advertising NFP events?
Yeah, Shani, do you want to jump in on that one first?
Look, I'd say when you're speaking to millennials, absolutely. We had a futurist come to talk to the business a few years ago, and he said at that stage, like, I was like, okay, what should we know that no one else knows yet? And he said, look, social media is here to stay, but Facebook's basically going to be the yellow pages of our generation. You know, like that's where you go when you just need to get in contact with someone. But Snap, and particularly TikTok at the moment, is driving news feeds. It's driving music releases. It's driving parts of society that you never would have imagined that social media would affect as much as it does. So I do think that social media is key, and making sure that you can get the right thing going. Last year for UN Women Australia, for example, the Monkeys, who are a creative agency here in Sydney, did some pro bono time for them and did a campaign that was called When Will She Be Right? And it was kind of based on the old quip of she'll be right, mate, you know, in Australia. But obviously the gender equality gap for women in Australia is still 100 years away. So they did a hashtag of When Will She Be Right? They did an amazing ad campaign, and they actually used social media to fuel that conversation. And I can't tell you how many millions of people saw the ad, but it was like something like 20 million in the first week. Pretty much the entire population of Australia had seen it, and that was all based on social media. They've just released a new campaign as of yesterday, actually. So I might send that to you, Jean, at the end, and everyone can have a look at UN Women's new ad campaign, which is absolutely amazing. And it's kind of the next iteration of what 100 years looks like, and all of the things that are going to happen in the next 100 years before women are equal.
That's awesome. I guess to add to that, I mean, it's a fantastic shout out on the benefits of platforms that have more recently emerged, like TikTok and all of their benefits. We see that time and time again. But maybe to add to that as well, what I see as a super valuable platform, particularly for NFP organizers, is LinkedIn. And it's linked in many ways to what you were talking about before, Shani, with people wanting much more purpose in their work and adopting a purpose in their professional identity as well. I see that a lot. And so LinkedIn is the perfect forum for people to be promoting, whether it's a dinner that they're going to, or a walk, or a marathon, or just a cause in general that they're getting behind, or an event, and starting to promote it as part of who they are professionally, and starting to own that and wanting to lean into that more. Perhaps their firm is a sponsor of the event. So that lends itself nicely to then have LinkedIn as quite an appropriate channel for the firm or the company or the organization that they work for them to then be an additional mouthpiece to spread the good word about what's happening and the event that they're going to, or the purpose and cause that they're supporting. Yeah, LinkedIn has been, it's a more and more valuable channel that we're seeing event hosts tap into.
100%. Thank you very much for the tips, Shani and Adams. It's been a very fruitful conversation, and I'm sure there's lots to take away for all of us. And just a reminder, we'll be sending you the recordings in 1 to 2 business days. And also grab this last chance to ask questions, because I'm sure Shani and Adam will get them to let you know more about events for purpose or not-for-profit sector. Just type your questions into the questions box and we will get them organized. So while we are waiting for the questions, do you think it's a good idea we can just show them if they wanted to submit inquiry for Humanitech, where should they go to? Maybe I can share my screen while we are waiting for the questions.
Sure, Jean, not a problem.
No worries.
While Jean brings that up, the easiest way to get involved and have Humanitix support your next event and us donate our profits back to your organization is to simply head to humanitix.com, or here on connectingup.org's website. We've got a special offer going now where we reduce our fees more than half for all nonprofits that use Humanitix. Humanitix itself is a nonprofit, so it's just really us doing what we think is our best at collaborating with the sector as a fellow nonprofit, which is just awesome. So what Jean's brought up here is on the product page and Connecting Up in Humanitix, where you can click there to get a demo, get in contact with our team, submit an inquiry form, obviously get access to the significantly reduced fees to help you save money on your events, which unfortunately is quite a big problem with many registration platforms that have insanely high fees. Every time I think I've seen the highest booking fee on a platform, I find a new platform charging a bigger fee. And so it's our privilege and our pleasure to do that, and that's why we work with so many nonprofits. Yeah, so jumping there, and if not there, just straight to humanitix.com.
Lovely, perfect. Thank you for sharing this.
Thanks.
And I'll also paste this link into the follow-up email so that if you would like to know further, just click on the link and then you'll get the information. So while we are talking about this, we got a question just jump in from Shirley. Is there a way for us to not have the free banner showing?
To not have the free banner, I imagine that might be a Humanitix question for someone currently using Humanitix.
Yeah, yes, yeah, Shelley just say yes.
I think so. It's quite in the weeds of the functionality. But I'd be happy to just let you know how to do it. It's in the event under your advanced settings. You just turn off what's called the price range. And so if your event, which is obviously a free event, by default, it'll show the price range, which is a free event. But you just toggle off the price range and it no longer will have that free banner. So you'll just have to get tickets or register for your event and your event page, which you can style with lots and lots of different beautiful options.
Lovely. And Shelley is just saying thank you, big thank you. So that answer her questions. And we got another questions from Shelley again. So for when the event is free for a focus group of attendees. So I guess that's a functionality question as well. I just assigned to you, Adam.
That means for when the event is free for a focus group of attendees, I'll try to completely understand the question, but if I could guess,
Oh, that's
The
links to the
Humanitics
first questions, I guess.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's correct. So if you're offering free tickets or free and paid tickets, by default, the price range there will be shown on your ticketing page, but you can simply turn that off by going into your advanced settings. You just click manage the event. On the left-hand side, you click advanced and go into your settings, and there's just a toggle there to toggle off the price range. So then you no longer show the price range of your event, which if you're only selling free tickets, it will just say free, which is I think what you're referring to is that free banner. Worth noting as well, for free tickets and free events, Humanitics is completely free. Free to sign up, free to run events, free to add permissions to as many accounts as you'd like to add in your organization. We don't charge per seat or anything like that, and it's just completely free, and it's our pleasure to offer that to events for anything that's free.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. All right, so looks like we have answered all the questions. Okay, we just got one come in. 1 second. Let me enlarge the questions a little bit. So I'll assign this to Adam as well. So are there any certain platforms that are best to host online events and where you can do live and also have a pre-recorded content?
Nice. Shani, do you want to jump into this one first, and kind of the various providers that you've worked with and found helpful? I know we did one together with UN Women that you were referring to earlier, and maybe some others that you've.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think we've used all of them. And, you know, across the past 2 years, it was a bit of a like, let's try it and see, and we'll see what happens. So, you know, we've worked with Vimeo, who are very reliable, and you can do the same thing. You can do live and pre-recorded content. You can do the same with YouTube. And then we used a company called Orbits for UN Women Australia, and that was the one that I was referring to, that allowed us to have 5 different live stages at any one time, plus an unlimited amount of pre-recorded content as well. So that's a more interactive, you know, that one's more costly because there's more to build and more to host. But it did allow, you know, an unlimited number of people to come in and interact. And what we find beneficial too, I'll add this in for virtual events or hybrid events, is making sure that that content is available not just on the event day, but also for a week, or if possible 2 weeks after the event date. Because not only people who went to a live event kind of want to catch up on that content and maybe relive some of the moments, but also people who couldn't kind of sit in for the entire day have an opportunity to come back and watch it on demand, which we've found really valuable.
That's awesome. Yeah, we've had an interesting position as a platform to kind of play in with all of the online event platforms like Orbits, for example, where we teamed up with UN Women with Orbits, and so Humanitics ran all the registrations, including for the online format of the event, and then neatly passed over via our integration into Orbits for Orbits to then produce the online format of the event for those that purchase tickets to that.
Excuse me, Adam, I mean, the Humanitics virtual option is actually so good. I should have mentioned that as well. So there's a way for people to access your content, and it's based on a unique link, so no one can pass it forward, you know, all of those types of things that you worry about when having a virtual event, and Humanitics is a fail-safe.
Yeah, thank you, Shani. Yeah, we built what's called the Virtual Events Hub as a really quick, simple, and nice, compelling way that you've got, you know, even when you're using one of the more simple platforms like a Vimeo or even a Zoom, it's kind of, you often have that bit of an awkward moment where people are even in just some dull waiting room, or they arrive at the event and they're all just kind of, you know, sitting around waiting for the content to start. And so that virtual events hub in Humanitics, it's completely free. You can generate this nice, compelling landing page where you can insert, whether it's Zoom or Vimeo or an Orbit or whatever else that's producing the event, as kind of content there that they can click into when the time is right. But on the rest of the page, you've got pre-recorded videos, gallery of images, content, maybe a donate button, stuff that they can engage with, and they can only access that virtual events page through their digital ticket that they purchased. And only one person, like Shani, you were saying, can access that page through one ticket at any one time. So if you're worried about people sharing the same ticket, that concern is addressed with that feature.
And we found that particularly useful when there's a sponsor for the virtual event or some online content, because you do a really simple creative frame around the video content, and that sponsor's name and brand can be seen there for the entire show. So that's a great plus and a good selling benefit for anyone who wants to get on board and support.
Lovely, that's fantastic. So we just got a response from this lady, Imogen. So helpful, thank you.
My pleasure, Imogen.
All right, so I guess that's pretty much for the questions. So before we finish, any last tips for us or anything you would like to add?
Cheers. For as crazy as it's been in the last 2 years, my honest tips would be have confidence in what you do next over the next 12 months. One of the biggest things that we've seen across the board with the thousands of event hosts that we partner up with is that their guests are a lot more forgiving when changes need to be made because of COVID than they expected. There's a lot of anxiety when event hosts we saw, putting together an event, lockdowns happen or some COVID thing happens, changes need to be made, and there's a heightened anxiety and, oh my God, what is my community going to think of me having to postpone the event or adjust the event? And the overwhelming response is one of empathy from guests, because it's not your fault and everyone knows that. And so that's been a kind of a helpful reminder that we've seen for event hosts to kind of go ahead with confidence, but make sure you communicate well if things need to change. So long as people are communicated with well, you have really nothing to worry about or be fearful about when trying to prepare in an uncertain environment.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Anything from you, Shani?
Oh, Adam's got it bang on. I totally agree with that. Adaptability is something that we've kind of harped on about for the last 2 years in terms of businesses and organizations need to adapt, but customers, consumers, donors, they're all there with us as well. And because of the unprecedented times that we're in, everyone's learning to do that to get together. So I would 100% back that up. And I'd also say, look, we set a goal to be a business that does good within an industry that we love, and it felt like an audacious goal 7 years ago, but now 80% of the work that we do is for organizations like yours, I'm sure, on the line, not for profits, and people who want to actually make some change. And anything is possible. I think you just need to be true to your values and stick to those.
Lovely. Thank you so much again, Adam and Shani. It's our honor to have you both today to share with us some very in-depth and inspiring conversations. Okay, so just last one reminder, you'll be getting your recordings in 1 to 2 business days. And if you have any questions, please drop us an email, and then we are very happy to get them answered. All right, thank you all of you. So have a lovely day ahead. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we got one last question just pop in 1 second ago. Let me assign to Adam. Lucky last, do you have any tips for not-for-profit in dance industry? Offering exams? For example, a good platform that won't lag. So specifically for dancing industry.
Dance industry. Particularly offering exams, I imagine that they're looking for. I mean, Shani, jump in if you think what is coming. Would that be for an exam solution where those? I imagine you're having to perform a dance to pass your exam, and there's a problem there with the lag of the production.
Yes, and then Danielle elaborate. Yes, we had to do it online exams nationally and internationally.
Unfortunately, I don't really have much guidance there, because mostly the reason why the lag happens, to our knowledge, is often not so much the platform itself. All the platforms are reasonably good. They actually mostly use the same back-end technology. It's going to be Twilio or something like that. So they're all running on the same stuff. They just have a different front end. And so the biggest reason why they lag is just internet and bandwidth.
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
We found the same
100%.
thing. You know, we speak to speakers all over the world. You know, Gary Vee in New York or Dr. Jane Goodall in London, and it really depends on what else is happening on their bandwidth at that time as to whether, you know, how well that interview might go. So unfortunately, there is nothing that's a fail-safe from a you know, web internet perspective.
No worries. Thank you very much. All right, so this comes to the end of today. Thank you all of you again. Thanks all the participants. All right, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for having us.
All right, goodbye.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.